Narayanam namaskrityam naram chaiva narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tado Jaya Mudiraye Nashta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhakti Bhavati Naishtuki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 30, Text 21. Chapter name, Description of Adverse Fruitive Activities. Please repeat after me. Tayor Nirbhinna Hridayas. Tayor Nirbhinna Hridayas. Tayor Nirbhinna Hridayas. Tarjanair Jata Vepatuhu. Tarjanair Jata Vepatuhu. Tarjanair Jata Vepatuhu. Pati Shwabir Bhakta Shayamana. Pati Shwabir Bhakshayamana. Pati Shwabir Bhakshyamana. Arto Agam Swam Anusmaran. Arto Agam Swam Anusmaran. Arto Agam Swam Anusmaran. Tayo Nirbhinna Hridayas. Tarjanai Jata Vepatuhu. Padishwabhi Bhakshyamana. Arto Agam Swam Anusmaran. Tayo Nirbhinna Hridayas. Tarjanai Jata Vepatuhu. Pati Swabir Bhakshyamana. Arto Agam Swam Anusmaran. Tayo Nirbhinna Hridayas. Tarjane Jata Vepatuhu. Adip Sabir Bhakshyamana. Arto Agam Anusmaran. Tayo Nirbhinna Hridayas. Tarjane Jata Vepatuhu. Padishwabhi Bhakshyamana. Adogam Anusmaran. Okay, transliteration. Please repeat after me. Tayoho. Of the Yamadutas, Nirbhinna, broken, Hridayaha, his heart, Tarjanahi, by the threatening, Jata, arisen, Vepatuhu, trembling, Pati, on the road, Shwabihi, by dogs. Bhakshyamanaha, being bitten. Artaha, distressed. Agam, sins. Swam, his. Anusmaran, remembering. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. While carried by the constables of Yamaraj, he is overwhelmed and trembles in their hands. While passing on the road, he is bitten by dogs, and he can remember the sinful activities of his life. He is thus terribly distressed. Please repeat after me. While carried by the constables of Yamaraj, he is overwhelmed and trembles in their hands. While passing on the road, he is bitten by dogs, and he can remember the sinful activities of his life. He is thus terribly distressed. Purport. It appears from this verse that while passing from this planet to the planet of Yamaraj, the culprit, arrested by Yamaraj's constables, meets many dogs, which bark and bite just to remind him of his criminal activities of sense gratification. It is said in Bhagavad Gita that one becomes almost blind and is bereft of all sense when he is infuriated by the desire for sense gratification. He forgets everything. Kamaistasta hita jnana. One is bereft of all intelligence when he is too attracted by sense gratification, and he forgets that he has to suffer the consequences also. Here, the chance of recounting his activities of sense gratification is given by the dogs engaged by Yamaraj. While we live in the gross body, such activities of sense gratification are encouraged even by modern government regulations. In every state, all over the world, such activities are encouraged by the government in the form of birth control. Women are supplied pills, and they are allowed to go to clinical laboratories to get assistance for abortions. This is going on as a result of sense gratification. Actually, sex life is meant for begetting a good child. But because people have no control over the senses, and there is no institution to train them to control the senses, the poor fellows fall victim to the criminal offenses of sense gratification, and they are punished after death as described in these pages of Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Shakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Shri Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakrajadam Sagana Raghunathānvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishaganvitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pashyatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gauratise Namaha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sude Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I was born in the darkness of ignorance. My spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. Offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Tavaivasmi na jivami tavaivina iti vidya devi tvam nayamam charanantikam makam karoti vatsalam pango langayate girim yat kripa tamaham vande Shri Guru Shitina Dharinam. Hare Krishna. Good morning and welcome to this morning's Bhagavatam class. Description of adverse fruitive activities. The topics described here are quite grim in nature. It's not something what we want to hear every day. The adverse effect of fruitive activities. The devotees who are strictly following the acharya, the disciplic succession, doesn't need to be too worried about these topics. These topics are related for living entities who are grossly engaged in in fruitive activities. These topics not necessarily apply for devotees who have taken up devotional service. So there's a bit of a relief when we understand that. Otherwise, these topics are quite severe. The human form of life is very rare. Prabhupada usually says 8,400,000 species, and out of which one gets this rare form of life. And this rare human form of life is a benediction. Getting a human form of life is rare and it's a benediction. Because through this human form of life, one gets an opportunity to realize who he is and how he can act on that, knowing who he is, and relieve himself of the material pangs and go back to Godhead. There's a privilege provided in this human form of life. But when a person is in a privileged state, doesn't take advantage of that privilege, he is punished. He is severely punished. If a person getting human form of life with superior intelligence, humans have superior intelligence. They are not like camels and asses, as Prabhupada says. It's not like, we are not like donkeys or camels, even though we behave like one, but we are not. We have superior intelligence. We have viveka, intelligence where we can question, we can introspectively question our predicament. So that's a privilege. And not only we can question, we also can act on it. Why am I suffering? How can I get out of this suffering? So we can act on it. So this human form of life is a privilege. And when a living entity misuses this privilege of human life and engages in the gross sense gratification, what the living entity has been doing for millions of lifetime already in lower forms of life, he is severely punished by the laws of nature. He is severely punished. And these punishments are explained in this chapter. Here we can see a person who is engaged in sinful activities, adverse fruitive activities. What it means? It means his life has been purely about gratifying his senses by hook or crook. He based his life on how to gratify the senses. And when this person goes through old age and eventually dies, this is the predicament he ends up in, where Yamadutas, the constables of Yamaraj, in 6th canto, or 1st chapter, the descriptions of Yamadutas are mentioned. Yamadutas, they look quite wicked and odd-looking people. When you're in a distress situation of already dying, you don't want to see some wicked-looking, odd-looking people. And Bhagavatam describes that Yamadutas have deformed features. Deformed features, and their faces are twisted, and they have this long hair sticking out of their body. Long hair sticking. Even when somebody is dreaming, you don't want to see something like that. It kind of puts you in a very uncomfortable situation. You wake up all sweaty. So generally that's why it is not recommended to sleep during the Sandhya time. Sandhya time is when the sun rises or when the sun sets. During this time it is recommended not to sleep, because these times are controlled by lower creatures, and they have these bodily features. And if you sleep during this time, if you're not conscious during these times of the day, you are inflicted by these creatures. You get to see them in a dream, or visualize them. So, and then you wake up all agitated and disturbed. It's a horrific scene. What to speak of when a person is dying? Where all the senses are, causing immense pain. You're in a very miserable situation. You can't speak. You can't breathe. It's not a comfortable situation to be. And then, at that situation, you end up seeing the servants of Yamaraj. So it's a predicament, quite horrible, quite horrible situation to be. So that is the nature of people who are engaged purely in sense gratification. The current world we live in, almost 99% of the people fall into this category. They're all gross sense enjoyers. Alcohol, foodie, women, indiscriminate enjoyment. That's what the major population is going through. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes them in chapter 7, text 15. Namam dushkritino mura prapadyante naradama. What is it? Maya aparata jnana asurim bhavam ashritaha. So asurim bhavam, they have adopted asurim. Asura means a demoniac lifestyle. They have adopted a demoniac lifestyle. And who are these people? These people are mudas, fools, gross, foolish people. Because doesn't matter how much suffering they go through, every opportunity they get, they try to enjoy their senses. They never question why they are suffering. In spite of that, when they are suffering, they always blame the suffering on somebody else. I was Yesterday I was sitting with Bhavan and the Prabhu and we were watching TV, and they were in the TV. They were saying the hay fever is coming. Hay fever season is coming, which has been exaggerated or exuberated due to climate change. They blame hay fever to climate change because there's climate change, there's hot weather, there's more flowers. So they're always blaming someone else. It's the climate change because somebody's burning fossil fuels, so I'm suffering. They never look inside and say, I'm suffering because I'm a sinful person. I've committed sinful activities. I'm committing sinful activities. That's why I'm suffering. They never think that. For example, this is when I was living in the temple here, and I was a pujari, so everyone was out collecting, and I was the only one in the temple. And this is the day after the big tsunami happened in 2005 or 2006. And the radio stations were calling various religious organizations, and they were attacking them. They were attacking and say, why is this happening? Why is not God protecting people? Why is, you worship God? Why is God letting all these people, because more than 500,000 people died during that earthquake and tsunami in 2006. So some radio station called the temple, and the receptionist, he patched the call to me, and I wasn't thinking. I was pick up the call. I said hello or Hare Krishna, and the radio jockey was quite attacking, and I was quite young, and I didn't have the discrimination of speaking to them nicely and calming them down. I immediately said, well, you lead a sinful life and you end up getting sinful reactions. You kill animals indiscriminately. That results in war, famine, natural disasters. And what do you expect? You want God to come and protect you. So I really gave it to them. So the person just got quite upset and then just hung up. I'm not sure if it was relayed. I hope it wasn't. But this is the truth. Mudas, foolish people, engage in indiscriminate sinful activities and expect God to protect them. It kind of comes from Christianity. I will just lead as sinful life as I can, and then Jesus will come, and then He will just suffer for us. I will just outsource my suffering to Son of God. It's a very foolish notion. If you eat something, you are the one who's tasting the food. It's not like Jesus is tasting the food. When you eat something. Similarly, when you perform sinful activities, you are the one who's supposed to suffer, not somebody else. You can't outsource your trouble when it is convenient for you. So these are mudas, foolish people who blame others, who try to convince Jesus to suffer for them. That's not the reality is. Yeah. And the next kind of people Krishna describes are naradamas, lowest of the lowest. People who are not cultured. What is that? People who are not cultured. What does that mean? That means people who have not taken up varnashram, who has not leading their life based on the principles of varnashram. They are considered naradamas, lowest of mankind. So the varnashram, even here in Prabhupada, where Prabhupada says somewhere where there is no institution to train them to control the senses. That institution to train people to control their senses, that institution is varnashram. That's the platform which gives people in general, not devotees per se, people in general, teaches them how to control their senses. And without that institution, the institution of varnashram, the living entities, the human beings are called naradamas, lowest of mankind. Because even though they have a human form of life, they are behaving like cats and dogs indiscriminately. They behave like cats and dogs. So they are naradamas. The third entities are Maya Apahrita Jnana. Maya Apahrita Jnana. So the so-called jnanis, the so-called intellectuals, who are actually very learned, but in wrong topics. Maya Apahrita Jnana, whose intelligence is being stolen by the so-called knowledge of their material education. So in Isopanishad, these people are condemned the most. What is that verse? Asurya namate loka andana tamasya vrita. No, not the one. Anda tama pravishyanti ye vidya upasate tato bhuya hivate tamo yayu vidyayam rataha. So the people whose intelligence, am I quoting the right verse? Is it Asurya te namate loka andena tamasya vrita? So anyway, in one of these two verses, verse 3 or verse 9, these people are explained. So it says, people who are engaged in gross sense gratification, they are pushed down to very lower forms of life. It's verse 3? Killer, Atmaha, killer of the soul. Thank you. So that's verse 3. And then the rest of the verse goes, what to speak of those who are so-called jnanis. What is their predicament? They are in a even worse situation. Because of their so-called knowledge, they pose themselves to be intellectuals and not only misguide themselves, they also misguide the general public. They start coming up with theories. What is wrong in enjoying senses? What is wrong in enjoying senses? They come up with ideas for gross sense gratification. As Prabhupada describes in this in the purport, they come up with pills and laboratories to carry out abortion. Yeah. So number one, these intellectual people convince women. Women are not considered very intelligent. Apologies. So these so-called intellectual people convince women to be frivolous. They use their intellectual logics and remove the womanhood from their secure protection and make them liberated. And so they liberate these women folks so that they can have indiscriminate sex. So when a woman is not protected, they are naturally being prone to be victims of men who are who want to take advantage of them. And and naturally the consequence is abortion. Or the natural consequence of indiscriminate sex is pregnancy. But they don't want to deal with the pregnancy, because pregnancy means it stops your sense gratification, both for women and for the men who are the reason behind it. For the women, they end up having a child, and this child prevents them from keep enjoying. Because for 9 months, you're carrying a baby around in your stomach, and then another 2-3 years, the baby is completely dependent on you. So you don't have option to go out and party. So the so-called intellects, what they come up with a way and the theories to destroy the child in the womb. It's such an abominable position, an abominable position. A woman, the motherly aspect is to protect the child. The whole womanhood, the motherhood is protect the child. Women are given certain qualities to protect, nourish the child. And because of this so-called intelligence of this modern world taking up the non-Vedic culture, both women and men are contaminated. They are even ready to kill their own child in the womb. This is Maya Abharata Jnana. This is why the Upanishads makes it appear or proclaims that the Jnanis who don't have Vedic or spiritual understanding are the worst, and they go to a planet which is worse than the gross sense enjoyers. So yeah, it is not a very conducive situation, because the world we live in is based on so-called science. The authority people take is scientists. Now, if you go and preach and you say this is if you engage in sinful activities, you need to suffer. They think we are some kind of sentimentalist. They think just some kind of religious dogma we are repeating. They want proof, and the proof is so-called proof. What they get is from the scientist, and the scientists come up with all the solutions, and the people are ready to follow them easily. Like if you go to a doctor and if you're weak, and they immediately say, eat meat, and people, even if they have some kind of sentiments, as soon as the doctor said so, they say, yeah, the doctor said, I want to, they start eating meat. I remember there was this lady who used to come, and this is again when I was a pujari, like 20 years ago. She's still coming around. She was just coming up, and she used to ask her how to progress in devotional life, and give some hints and all. And then after sometimes I met her and say, how are you going? And she said, I got really weak and I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me I should start eating proteins. So what it means, she started eating eggs. It doesn't matter how much you say, scripture, she was taking kind of siksha, from me, and but as soon as the doctor said that, immediately all this spiritual education what you got, you don't consider. You immediately say, oh, doctor said that, and then they start engaging in sinful activities. So the scientists pose a threat to humanity, where they present their own ideas and distract human beings from their goal of life. Anyway, these descriptions are for gross materialists. From a devotee point of view, as I mentioned, these topics are not so much relevant, because devotees are focusing or are consciously avoiding sense gratification, consciously avoiding leading a sinful life, and they are taking up devotional service. Even if any leftover vasanas or leftover sinful inclinations they have or they are engaging, it's not really taken serious. It's not taken serious, with an understanding that they will be gradually purified. That's why Prabodhananda Saraswati quotes in Chaitanya Charita, what is that? Kaivalyam narakayate, Tridashapura akasha pushpayate, Durdanta indriya khala patalai, Durdanta indriya khala patalai, Prokta damsrayate, Vishwam purna sukhayate, what is that? Vidhi Mahendradi Kitayate. So, for devotees, the real fear is not the sinful activities. They consider even kaivalya to be like hell, because they are not interested in merging and losing their identity. They want to be engaged in Krishna's service. And even the position of Indra, or the heavenly position, they know it's just a phantasmagoria or a flower in the sky. Akasha pushpayate, flower in the sky, because they know there's no real enjoyment even in heavenly planets. Even if there is so-called enjoyment, after that enjoyment is done, you're pushed back into this to lower planetary systems. So they are not really interested in that. The verse relevant, or the line relevant to the topic we are speaking is Durdanta Indriya Kalapatalai. The senses of the devotees are considered to be the broken fangs of a serpent. When a serpent, a poisonous snake, has its fangs in full size, only then it can inflict the poison. Only then it can cause harm. But if those fangs are broken, if the fangs are removed, the snake, even though it carries poison, it can't really attack anyone. It can't bite anyone. Even if it bites anyone, the poison is not injected. So there is no harm done. Similarly, even the senses of the devotees are, in the lower states, poisonous. But since they are engaged in devotional service of the Lord, those senses are considered to be broken, like the fangs of this poisonous snake, and they really don't cause much infliction. They're not really inflicting, because devotees are always engaged in higher activities. And even if there is any incidental fall down, they are always, they know they have done something wrong, and they are consciously trying to avoid it or understand their predicament and become humble and pray for Krishna's mercy. So Prabodhananda Saraswati says, so devotees don't need to be worried too much about their senses or the effects caused by the senses. And of course, we sadhakas don't want to misinterpret that and take advantage of these injunctions and then start grossly engaging in devotional service with an idea that you will be protected. For that, in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada uses the word perplexed. Their situation is in a perplexing situation. When I read the Bhagavad Gita first time, this particular word, I didn't know what perplexed was. So I went and asked some devotees, what is the meaning of this word? Those days I didn't, you don't have a dictionary to go and refer. So I remember that word. So devotees who engage in devotional service at the same time have some attachment to sense gratification, their situation is a bit perplexed. What does that mean? What does that perplexity mean? Generally, when we say, as soon as the devotional service, just in the very beginning of devotional service, when somebody just takes up devotional service, one's sanchintya karma is destroyed. He is left behind only with the prarabdha karma. The more definitions of sanchintya is given in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. I'll just give an overview. Sanchintya karma means the karma, the bank balance of all the sinful activities which you accumulated, which is sitting in the bank balance, which Yamaraj is keeping account. So this huge bank balance, it's a mountain of sinful activities which we accumulated living in this world for millions of lifetime, gets destroyed immediately when one takes up devotional service. When one takes up devotional service. But the prarabdha karma, karma remains till one becomes a pure devotee. What is prarabdha karma? The karma which we are given in this lifetime. The example, like bank balance, you have money in the bank, and you have money in the wallet. The money in the bank is destroyed by taking up, even in the early stages of devotional service, is destroyed. But the money in your wallet, that you have to spend. And the money in the wallet is this body and the senses you have to spend and you have to endure too. That doesn't get destroyed easily. That gets destroyed by taking up pure devotional service. So the perplexity comes in where a devotee taken up devotional service is still engaged in sinful activities or in sense gratification. So he's just putting more money in the wallet. It means he has to suffer this in the body what he has. He has to suffer, or the fruits of devotion, or the benefit of devotional service, which is ultimately liberation and being present with Krishna, that gets delayed for 1 or 2 lifetimes. And for devotee, that is the most miserable fear, because the delay. He has to endure to achieve the association of Krishna. So that is the fear of a devotee. The descriptions mentioned in these words, this is not a real fear of devotee, because devotees don't go through these because of the good fortune of taking shelter of devotional service. Like the example we can see, a couple of examples given in Bhagavatam, is Bharat Maharaj. Even though he increased his prarabdha by falling in love with a deer, and it delayed a couple of his lifetime, but he didn't go endure these descriptions, where he is dragged by the Yamadutas, where he is get bitten by dogs and thrown in hellish conditions. He doesn't go through that, even though he has some money in his wallet. Unnecessarily, he put some money in the wallet. So he doesn't go through it. So devotees are protected. The other famous example is Canto 6, story of Ajamil. The most sinful person, fallen from grace, a top class born in a top class Brahmana family, learnt all the Vedic injunctions, know all the mantras, know how the process works. But due to some misfortune, this top class Brahmana, a highly qualified Brahmana boy, falls a victim to a prostitute and engages in sinful activities. So he falls from grace so much that he gives up his occupation, Brahminical occupation, and engages in very sinful activities, like mugging people for money, gambling, stealing money from people. Generally, Brahmanas don't do this. People who are trained up in Brahminical activities don't generally in those ages. Nowadays, they are engaged in all kind of sinful activities. Of course, these are all Brahmanas just by birth, not by training. But here, Ajamil not only was a top-class Brahmana from birth, but he was also trained, highly trained. In spite of that, he was engaged in these awful activities. When a Brahmana comes and steals, the culture of the society is you don't fight back. It's because he's a Brahmana, you're afraid. So, he was taking advantage of his high birth and leading a very, very sinful life. He gave up his beautiful wife, who was very qualified, and lived in the association of a prostitute. So that's how sinful Ajamil was. And during his last moment, he spent about 88 years living. When he was 88 years, about time to die. And when he was getting sick and about to die, he sees the Yamadutas. The Yamadutas have arrived to take him. and he was scared. The description I gave in the beginning of the class, this is from that particular story, where he sees these Yamadutas and he is scared, and out of fear, he calls out his youngest son, who he is very attached to, and luckily the youngest son his name happened to be Narayana. By just chanting the name of the Lord, even though its name of his son happened to be the name of the son, he chanted the name of the Lord. Immediately, the Vishnudutas show up in the scene and protect him from Yamadutas. Immediately protect him. And what they say to the Yamaduta, they said, what kind of followers of Yamaraj you are trying to arrest a person who has no sins, who is sinless. And Yamadutas are perplexed, what is going on here? We have documentation stating that this is a most sinful person, fallen from grace, led an obnoxious, sinful life, and you're telling this person has no sins. They're completely convinced. And the Vishnudutas chastise them. They're getting chastised for doing their job. They're doing their own right job, which they're going by the document and say, look. But Vishnudutas said, this person is sinless. So by just chanting the name of Krishna once, all your sins are eradicated, you're purified. And of course, Ajamil did not immediately go back to Vaikuntha or Goloka. He has to still nullify his prarabdha karma, the money in the wallet. So he goes to Haridwar and he practices devotional service, and he achieves unalloyed devotional service. And then a golden plane comes, he jumps on the plane and goes back to Godhead. So devotees have some privileges. To avoid suffering, the mountain of sinful activities we have committed, and not go through these descriptions. The other way of looking at it is devotees know or understand that their position is somehow protected, even though they need to be careful. Don't take advantage. They have to be careful. But on the other hand, they also could come to a conclusion that the suffering of a grossly materialistic people. So compassion rises in devotees' heart. So they're engaged, and that gives them the impetus to preach to the people who are going to hell in this horrible way, who are blinded by the material sense gratification. So that compassion, that real compassion, can come only to devotees, who have learnt. All other compassion is, you're just adding more fuel to the fire. The mundane compassion is, a person doesn't have enough sense gratification, so you're making privileges for him to gratify their senses more. Now, we are not talking about that compassion. Here, the compassion is, devotee sees and understands the suffering of the material world. Understands that the living entity present in all these material bodies are also part and parcel of Krishna, and they are also intimately connected with Krishna, and they understand they are suffering, or they are going to go through suffering. So a genuine compassion raises in the heart of the devotee, and then the devotee engages in preaching activities. The preaching activity starts with first acting properly oneself, and then preaching, engaging in various activities, like book distribution. We go on book distribution not so that so that we are the biggest book distributor in the world. We're not not necessarily going in book distribution for Lakshmi, for collecting Lakshmi. Lakshmi does come in handy for devotional service or to increase preaching activities, but the real crux is out of compassion. You're going out of compassion to liberate the living entities. If you don't go on book distribution, you don't go on Harinam, you don't go on book Prasadam distribution, you don't put yourself out some or other way, the living entities who are part and parcels of Krishna are suffering in the hands of the constables of Yamaraj. The constables of Yamaraj.
Sorry, excuse me. Whose motorbike is parked there? Could you please move the bike? Put it there. Thank you.
That's okay. So when we read these topics, don't need to overly depress yourself, but instead be careful of the other side. If we don't follow, take up devotional service, the other problems, and also genuinely grow that compassion, knowing what the living entities are suffering. Because devotees, they are safe in the hands of Acharya. For example, ocean. The material world is considered samsara. It's a dark, big ocean, very hard to cross. For a person swimming in the middle of the ocean, their situation is quite perplexed. But for a devotee, he's in a big ship of the sampradaya, the ship of sampradaya, and the acharya is an expert captain who's leading the ship. So the captain knows how to navigate, how to avoid storms, big tsunamis. The captain knows. So just by being in the ship and following the instructions of the captain, of the acharya, us living entities, we are not bothered by the calamities of the ocean. Because if you are not in the ship, if you are in the ocean, the calamities are, for minuscule living entities, unimaginable. The sharks and the jellyfishes and the tsunamis and the whirlpools, all these are present. But devotees, they are actually in the cruise. That's why the verse I quoted, it says, Vishwam Purna Sukhayate. For a devotee who has taken shelter of the lotus feet of Mahaprabhu. Lotus feet of Mahaprabhu. This world is Sukhayate. He is very happy. Because he knows either in this body or in other body, he is engaged in devotion service to the Lord. His duty is to engage in devotion service, and he is engaged in devotion service. And devotional service is very pleasurable. You know it or not, it is very pleasurable. It's very joyful. That's why in Manasa Deho Deho song, I'm not going to sing, in that Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Kita Janama, what is that? Kita Janma Hoi, Jatha Tavadas. Even if I take birth as an insect, let me take birth in the house of a devotee. So even if we don't make it, because we have performed devotion service, accepted Acharya, chanted the holy name, and we always end up somewhere within the association of devotees. And by association of devotees, we get purified some or other. And so we are not really too much worried about being bitten by dogs when you're dragged by Yamaraj. We are worried about how not to delay active devotional service. to Krishna. So, in that note, I will finish here. Yeah.
Couple of things. Just reflecting on today's and yesterday's shloka. How do we understand that a subtle thing, such as like mind, intelligence, ego, and soul, can be captured by a rope, a gross rope?
Sorry, captured by what?
Rope.
Rogue.
Yeah, rope. R-O-P-E.
Oh, rope. Oh, rope. Okay.
Yesterday it's actually mentioned in the shloka. And even today's, purport, it actually vividly describes how the Yamadutas actually drag the subtle body. So how do we understand that? I mean, a subtle thing hasn't got a form or anything gross, right? I mean,
Well, the subtle thing doesn't have a form which you can perceive. The subtle form has a form which subtle entities can perceive. And they use a subtle rope to drag the subtle body and then drag them.
because interestingly, yesterday it said gross rope.
It doesn't say, it says strong rope. That's what it says here. I'm reading. Who bind him by the neck with a strong rope and cover his subtle body so that they may undergo severe punishment. Not a gross rope. It's not a gross rope. Actually. If it's a gross rope, you will see it. Speaking of the rope, as a child, my grandmother used to threaten me. If you don't wear tilak, we wear tilak, all the bodies of like, 3 or 5 years old, you got to wear tilak. So she used to say, if you don't wear tilak, if there is tilak in the body, the ropes won't touch you. Wherever the tilak is in the body, that's why the tilaks are strategically placed, so the ropes won't touch you. So she used to tell me, then I'll say, yeah, I'll put tilak. I don't want this rope tying me. Yeah. So she used to tell me, and I used to wear tilak. So by engaging in devotional activities, by wearing tilak, by wearing kantimala, by taking prasad, association of devotees, this strong rope is not, even though these things appear to be simple paraphernalias, but we don't understand the power of these devotional paraphernalias. That's why devotees always wear tilak. Don't take it for granted. Always wear tilak all over the body, as described. Always wear tilak, so kantimala, the way Prabhupada wanted, tight around your neck. Try to have, and try to have other qualities of a Vaishnava and engage in devotional service. So we are protected from the ropes of Yamaduta. Okay, do I answer your question?
So which we can't perceive, but obviously it's a subtle thing.
Yeah, subtle thing. Well, you can perceive when you give up the gross body, and if you're grossly sinful,
So that can be experienced.
they experience, yeah. These things, the dogs are not gross dogs, they're subtle dogs. They're biting them and they're experiencing the pain and they're seeing it, the life flashing before them of all these sinful activities. These are all being visualized by the subtle senses, not by the gross senses.
And Yamadutas, they're actually considered as devotees as well. That's not their
Yeah, they are devotees, but not. Yeah, they are following the order of Yamaraj, who is a devotee. So they are devotees removed from devotees in the sense, they are not direct associates of the Lord. They are devotees in the sense they are carrying out the order of devotee. Like a police constable is a member of the royal structure, but he is not a member of the royal family. You know what I'm saying? They're all part of the a king's entourage, but devotees are personal. And constable, he's also a government employee, king's employee, but he's one step removed in that sense, yeah.
And also Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the purport that about the government authorities. So whichever authority encourages the sense gratification, they would actually get part of karma as well.
Yeah, they get that's where I quoted this Upanishad, text 3. They actually get the worse, because they're not only going to hell, they're also misleading. So the Maya Apurita Jnana, the avidya propagators, the scientists, that's why Prabhupada always attacked the scientists. Scientists are rascals, because they're not only going to hell, but they're also making it, justifying them going to hell, or the activities they're performing which is dragging them to hell. So they're justifying. So innocent people follow them, and they all, they're misled. So the scientists, the government authorities, they are the worst culprit, and they endeavor more than. So in even legal system, a person who has committed a murder is punished, but the person who coerted into making the person commit the murder, he is actually punished more, even in the current legal system. Because, the person who pays or, cooks up a situation to do that, he is punished more. Because, he was, yeah. Okay. All right. If there is no questions, I will. Yeah. I can't hear. Speak up.
How can these four types of Vishvitas, Buddhas, Narayamas, and Maya Jnanas and Asuras who are not inclined to take the center of the devotee, not inclined to take the center of Krishna, still get the mercy of devotees and Krishna?
Yeah. Well, the description is of the word, the very question, the words, what is it? Namam Dushkritino Mura, and these four kind of people, how they will take shelter, or how they can come to Krishna consciousness. That is the question. Well, the very definition of this verse, the verse what Krishna says is, these people don't come. They don't come. And not only that, Krishna actually makes arrangements so that they get implicated more. They get implicated more. That's a verse Prabhupada quotes here. Kamasya is the hitagyana prapadyante anya devata. Tam tam niyam hastaya. What is that? Niyama something swaya. So I actually make arrangements. I actually make their faith firmer in whatever the practices they are taking up, so that they can be put through, or can be banished. Krishna says that. That's the others, the other aspect of Krishna's mercy, because these people are troublemakers. If you just let them be around, if you not push them to lower forms of animals, they will just cause unnecessary headache, even for people who are trying to practice devotional service. So that's why Krishna pushes them to lower forms of life. They become a nuisance, a hindrance to the gentle society. That's how Krishna approaches. But devotees tend to be much more merciful. Devotees are paradukha dukhi. They devise plans how to attract these people, and some or other give them devotional service. But they are also careful, in the sense they don't on the name of preaching dilute the teachings, dilute the philosophy, and or dilute their own personal sadhana by associating with them. And they also deal with it in a cautious way. So devotees generally devise, a simple answer is, we go on Harinam. Harinam is very powerful. It's a Yuga Dharma started by Mahaprabhu. Anybody hears the holy name gets purified. So these four aspects of their Muda, Naradama, those qualities slowly diminish because of they heard the holy name sung by devotees. So they get purified. You guys go on book distribution. Somebody, if they out of good fortune they buy. Generally envious people they don't. They just reject. But if they happen to buy the mercy and they have the association of devotees or read a few pages, they get some traction. And the other thing is prasadam distribution. We distribute prasadam. Prabhupada wanted prasadam to be distributed because the lowest of the lowest, who can't appreciate the holy name, who can't appreciate the books, at least they can eat prasadam. That's why prasadam should be cooked very tastefully, very sumptuously, with a lot of ghee and good prasadam. Not like, I'm following brahmacharya, so I have to be very, I want to eat fried puris. No, that's, you're being selfish about your own salvation. Prasadam should be opulent, should be plenty. Puris, halwa, sweet rice, gulab jamuns, nice rice. So even a very sinful person, the ghee has fragrance. You can smell fresh ghee, cooked pakoras. You can smell. Their senses get attracted. And then, even they are so envious, they get attracted. But if you cook all this vegan food, health conscious food, which tastes like plastic, it's not attracting the senses of a kami. When we used to have Sunday feast, Australia used to be very famous for its prasadam, Sunday feast, cakes, and people would just come for prasadam. They had no interest in whatever we are doing. They used to just come for this opulent prasadam. And now the prasadam is terrible. Even devotees don't want to eat. Because we all become health conscious, all this rubbish veganism we are taken up. So have opulent prasadam. So even the most sinful person get attracted and they want to eat prasadam, and by eating prasadam, Krishna's mercy, they have change in the heart. Not necessarily now, not necessarily this lifetime, but immediate lifetime. They don't need to endeavor millions of lifetime. They will be given opportunities to rekindle that seed of connection they have. Do that make sense? So let's go on Harinam, distribute books, have nice prasadam, and then enjoy devotional service. Okay. Thank you very much. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ita Go Premanande, Vansha Kalpatrabhyusha Kripa Sindhubhya Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha.